What's rock and roll without sex or drugs? In the 80s, hedonism wasn't just sung about, and some of the decade's biggest names took the party on stage with them. In 2004, Van Halen set off on tour with former lead singer Sammy Hagar. At the time, Eddie Van Halen was in the habit of drinking wine straight from a bottle from the start of sound check till the end of the night. The last stop on the tour was Tucson, Arizona in November. In his memoir Red, Hagar wrote, "It was the worst show we'd ever done in our lives. Eddie played so bad." At the end of the show, Eddie erupted in a fit of anger and frustration, destroying his guitar and tossing debris into the crowd while crying and shouting, "You don't understand." Van Halen was in the middle of a rare 3-month pause in their touring schedule in May 1983 when Apple founder Steve Wozniak offered the band a headlining slot at his US Festival to the tune of $1.5 million. The band jumped at the cash, then showed up 3 hours late. David Lee Roth sat for an interview with MTV VJ Mark Goodman, who described him in I Want My MTV, writing, "He was drunk and coked up, laughing at every joke he made." The band, all hammered but with Roth particularly far gone, finally took the stage. Roth slurred through his lyrics, the ones he got right. The band managed to deliver a monster show, but Roth stumbled around the stage till the end of the set. Guns N' Roses released their first album, Appetite for Destruction, in 1987. It sold 18 million copies in the US alone, and by 1991, the band could do whatever they wanted. They decided to release 2 Use Your Illusion albums and set out on a 2-year-long concert tour. Much of the band's popularity and critical acclaim centered around its gifted lead guitarist Slash, who at the time was drinking heavily, sometimes even on stage during a show. One night at New York's Madison Square Garden, Slash was so drunk that he botched the iconic introductory riff to Welcome to the Jungle, then played in the wrong key. If the audience wondered whether something was wrong, their suspicions were confirmed when Slash stopped the show to tell the crowd why he'd taken off everything but his underwear, saying, "I had to change my clothes, 'cause the pants I was wearing broke, and my were hanging out."
I don't have any regrets about any of it, and it was a lot of fun.
Motley Crue lead singer Vince Neil was the definition of a rocker who partied way too hard. In 1984, Neil was responsible for a fatal drunk driving accident. And more than 2 decades later, Neil, having left Crue temporarily for a solo career, was still drinking heavily.
This band constantly invents new chaos. We everything up.
In June 2006, Neil and fellow 80s hair metal survivors Rat played a gig together at the Amalie Arena in Tampa, Florida. During his set, Neil struggled to recall the lyrics to the songs he'd sung hundreds of times before. Then he nearly fell off the stage. When the crowd booed him, Neil walked off while his band kept playing. When he returned, John Corabi, who was then one of Rat's guitarists and at one point Neil's successor in Motley Crue, helped Neil get through a song. Later, in an interview with the Calgary Sun, Neil admitted, "I was pretty buzzed. I tripped, fell off, sometimes it happens. I drank a little too much, whoop-de-doo." Glam metal bands were well known for their booze-soaked, drug-fueled antics, and Poison was especially notorious. Bassist Bobby Dall regularly drank alcohol to excess. In 1988, Poison came to Green Bay, Wisconsin to play the Brown County Veterans Memorial Arena. The plan was to film the video for their upcoming single Every Rose Has Its Thorn at the venue and in a nearby warehouse. Filmmakers got all the footage they needed, as well as clips of Dall being visibly intoxicated. In 2017, he told the Green Bay Press-Gazette, "There's a scene where you see me where I'm wasted and I fall down, and I'm literally being picked up by my guy that worked for me at the time. That scene, I am drunk and wasted in. That's not fake."
At the same time there was chemistry, there was a natural friction between Brett and I.
In 1991, Poison was invited to perform at the MTV Video Music Awards. They planned to play their latest hit, Unskinny Bop, then singer Bret Michaels asked the audience if they were willing to talk dirty to me. Guitarist CeCe DeVille was confused by what he thought was a last-second switch, but rolled with it, churning out the opening riff to their 1987 hit, Talk Dirty to Me. The band followed DeVille's lead and launched into the song, whether or not that's what Michaels intended. According to Michaels, DeVille was heavily intoxicated. He wandered around the stage and even managed to unplug his guitar. Michaels kept his composure until the band got backstage. Then, according to what he says in Nothing But a Good Time, the uncensored story of 80s hair metal, it was an instant knockdown, drag-out fistfight. Poison fired DeVille that night, but he rejoined the band in 1996 and once again went on stage drunk. Hair metal parody band Steel Panther once asked DeVille to sit in, telling 97.9X he didn't want to play the guitar, so he got on the drums, and he was so drunk, and he just started doing a drum solo. And we were looking back at him, and we were like, "CC, stop. You have to stop playing the drums." And he wouldn't stop playing the drums, so we actually had to have security forcibly remove him. A pioneer of the 80s robotic, synth-driven sound, Depeche Mode morphed into a more guitar-based alt-rock band in the early 90s. As a result, they began to play more traditional venues like giant stadiums, and in 1993, they set out on their devotional tour. Many Depeche Mode shows from that era were incredibly dangerous for lead singer Dave Gahan. At various stops, he lost his voice on stage. He was even forced to cancel a show after cutting up his hand with a beer bottle.
If I was high, I was out of mind, and therefore I felt like I was out of sight, and therefore I felt that it didn't matter somehow.
Then Gahan nearly died in front of an audience in October 1993. After the group finished their set at New Orleans' Lakefront Arena and headed off stage, spectators screamed for an encore, but Gahan found himself unable to move. He had terrible pain in his chest and felt his legs give out underneath him. His bandmates, all of whom had grown tired of Gahan's attitude and medical problems, returned to the stage for an encore, savagely choosing the song Death's Door. Gahan, meanwhile, was too sick to sing. Paramedics arrived and took him away on a stretcher. Actively abusing multiple drugs, including heroin, cocaine, marijuana, and alcohol, Gahan had had a heart attack. The acclaimed Minnesota indie rock band The Replacements made their national television debut on a January 1986 episode of Saturday Night Live. The band planned to play their sloppy, feedback-laden, super melodic punk variant, and saw no reason not to take the stage the way they usually did, blind drunk. It was a terrible idea. SNL enforces a no-alcohol rule on show days, but the band got one of their instrument techs to sneak some into the studio. The musicians spent the better part of that Saturday drinking heavily, which was abundantly clear when they launched into Bastards of Young on live TV. Paul Westerberg couldn't keep his vocals in tune when he bothered to sing into the mic at all. He wandered around the stage while bassist Tommy Stinson stumbled and lurched so violently that the camera crew struggled to keep him in frame. Sensing that guitarist Bob Stinson, whose playing was noticeably affected by his inebriation, would forget his solo, Westerberg yelled out, "Come on, which didn't get caught in time by NBC censors. The messy, chaotic performance ended with Bob Stinson briefly flashing his rear end after tearing his pants attempting a somersault. In 1977, Topper Headon replaced Terry Chimes, who left The Clash and went on to play with other major bands of the era. At the time, Headon had just split from his wife, then dove headfirst into the rock and roll party culture. Speaking to The Independent in 2009, Headon said, "I went on the road and discovered booze. All I did was drink, drink, drink. Then Mick Jones turned me onto coke, and all I did was coke." By the early 80s, Headon was snorting coke during shows after every third song, saying, "The lights would go off and my drum roadie would be there with a mirror." Headon's bandmates were increasingly annoyed with him, particularly after their roadies introduced him to heroin. Headon entered rehab in 1982 and rejoined The Clash, but he was suspended after he started using coke again. Then band leader Joe Strummer, who was drunk, told a journalist, and thus the public as well as Headon, that the suspension was actually a termination. In the 1970s and 1980s, two guys demonstrated more than anybody that the piano is a rock and roll instrument: Elton John and Billy Joel. John and Joel toured together on occasion, and they played Madison Square Garden in New York City in March 2002. After a joint set and a segment from John, Joel came out for his solo portion. The audience had been warned beforehand that they may not get the greatest ever Joel concert that night because the musician had a cold. His vocals weren't particularly off-kilter, but his behavior sure was. In the midst of his performance, Joel went off on a tangent full of observations and jokes about American history. In short order, he made fun of the cracked Liberty Bell, then yelled out the names of some random World War II battles, screaming, "Corregidor, Midway, Guadalcanal." Writing for the New York Times, Khalifa Saneh reported, "When he slumped forward on his bench and slurred, 'Don't try to save me,' he sounded truly hopeless. As he wailed, he banged on his keys almost at random. He continued to play poorly during a duet of Benny and the Jets with Elton, and at the end, Sir Elton could be seen mouthing the words, 'Thank God.'" About 3 months later, Joel went to rehab. In 1980, filmmaker Penelope Spheris began work on her documentary about the brutal Los Angeles punk scene, the decline of Western civilization. One of the bands featured was the Germs, led by singer Darby Crash. A still of Crash captured during a performance depicting the musician imitating a prone corpse became the poster for the film. Crash had been super drunk when the image was taken, as he often was during Germ shows. After he saw an early screening of the film and the first run of posters, Crash was upset about how he was portrayed.
Why do you get so loaded to perform?
Because that way I don't feel myself getting hurt. I mean, it's scary out there.
In the book Lexicon Devil, The Fast Times and Short Life of Darby Crash and the Germs, Crash's friend Casey Cola recalled, "What he saw that night devastated him. Darby was kind of a sloppy, stupid drunk, and that is how he appeared in the movie. He thought the movie looked creepy, and he was so upset he wanted to kick holes in the wall." Crash died by suicide in December 1980 before the film was released. In the mid-80s, young band Metallica was already so notorious for drinking that some called them alcoholica. Everyone in the first iteration of Metallica drank heavily, but only guitarist Dave Mustaine turned nasty when the boozing began. He told Loudwire, "I'd be aggressive and confrontational because I was a violent drunk. That didn't go over well in the end." No, it didn't. In 1983, Metallica fired Mustaine.
If you ever wake up and the other three band members staring at you as you're rubbing sleep out of your eye, it's probably not a good sign.
But that didn't curb their drinking. In 1989, at a show in Mountain View, California, frontman James Hetfield drank what appeared to be alcohol from a plastic cup on stage, only to puke it back up seconds later. Fan footage of another show caught Hetfield and bassist Jason Newsted drinking together. The singer asked for a beer, and Newsted brought him one, staggering the whole way. "Drunk already?" Hetfield asked. "Drinking music, maestro," he then commanded, taking a break to suck down his beer while the bassist awkwardly plunked away. If you or anyone you know needs help with addiction issues, is struggling, or is in a crisis, contact the relevant resources below, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration website, or contact SAMHSA's National Helpline at 1-800-662-HELP, 4357. Call or text 988 or chat 988lifeline.org.